going to start off with the urinary system and excretion. The urinary system consists of organs that produce, store, and rid the body of urine. As you can see, we've got the diagram of it right here. We're going to start off with the kidneys. The kidneys are bean-shaped, reddish-brown organs, each about the size of a fist, which produce urine. They are covered with fibrous connective tissue with adipose tissue covering it. Adipose meaning the fat tissues. The kidneys play a huge part in homeostasis because they get rid of waste, regulate water-salt balance, and they are an acid-base balance of the blood. And moving down, we got the ureters, which are tubes of about 25 centimeters that carry the urine to the bladder by peristalsis, which is similar to the muscular digestion of the digestive tract. Now here we have the urinary bladder, which holds up to 600 milliliters of urine. It is a hollow muscular organ that gradually expands as urine enters. The walls consist of connective tissue and smooth muscle. At 250 milliliters, you can avoid the pressure to go to the bathroom, but around 500 milliliters, it becomes really uncomfortable. Finally, we have the urethra, which carries urine from the bladder out of the body. Urine flows from the bladder out of the body by the way of the urethra when the sphincter muscles is relaxed. The urethral sphincter muscle is at the base of the bladder and controls the release of urine from the bladder into the urethra, which flows out of the meatus, which is the opening at the end of the urethra when urinating. The urethra is approximately 1.5 inches long in females and around 8 inches long in males. The kidney is the main organ in the excretory system. It produces urine, filters the body of wastes, and maintains pH levels in the blood. There are three major regions of the kidney: the renal cortex, renal medulla, and the renal pelvis. The renal cortex is the outer, smooth, and continuous layer of the kidney. It dips down into the inner layer, called the renal medulla. The renal medulla consists of cone-shaped tissue masses called renal pyramids. Even further down is the renal pelvis. This is the cavity that moves into the ureter, the tube that carries urine to the bladder. Oxygenated blood from the renal artery enters the kidneys to be cleansed of any waste that are present within it. Waste in a small concentration of salt, water, among other substances, are sent out of the kidneys to be excreted from the body. The kidney is made up of millions of nephrons. Here is a nephron. It is a winding tube that dips down into the medulla, goes up into the cortex, and finally ends at a collecting duct. The fluid that travels along the nephron will exit this collecting duct and pass through the ureters. Let's start at the very beginning, the glomerulus. This is a large collection of capillaries that are nestled into a small capsule called the Bowman's capsule. Small molecules diffuse through the capsule and go into the proximal convoluted tubule, which sends out nutrients like water and glucose back into the blood. Molecules then move down the descending lip and up the ascending lip. This loop is called the loop of Henle, where some percentage of salt and water go back to the body. As its journey comes to a close, the molecules travel through the distal convoluted tubule, which separates the last of the waste from the blood, and finally, this mixture of waste goes down the collecting duct into the ureter as urine. To go into detail, blood flow from the renal artery enters an arterial capillary known as the afferent arteriole. This arteriole feeds blood to the glomerulus, which in turn diffuses molecules from within into the Bowman's capsule. This process is called pressure filtration because the diffusion occurs due to different pressure levels between the glomerulus and the Bowman's capsule. Another arteriole, known as the efferent arteriole, moves blood into a group of capillaries known as the peritubular capillary network that coat the nephron so that waste can enter the nephron and nutrients can return to the blood. The proximal convoluted tubule is the first stop of the nephron. A function called tubular reabsorption occurs here. Nutrients from the glomerular filtrate, a mixture of substances that is within the nephron, are reabsorbed into the peritubular capillary network, and waste remain in the nephron. In the case of glucose, it is entirely returned to the blood, so the concentration of glucose in the renal artery should be the exact same as in the renal vein. The proximal convoluted tubule is coated with microvilli, which help it perform its function. These
As we move across the nephron, our next stop is the loop of Henle, consisting of a descending and ascending limb. The descending limb diffuses water out into the medulla due to an osmotic gradient that is present from salt leaking out of the ascending limb. The distal convoluted tubule is up next. It separates the last of the waste from the blood through tubular secretion, a process where wastes are added to the distal convoluted tubule via active transport. To help this process, the distal convoluted tubule does not have any microvilli. Lastly, the wastes are sent down the collecting duct on their way to exit the kidney.
The whole point of the loop of nephron is to return the water that was diffused into the nephron via pressure filterization back to the body. To do this, it makes the renal medulla salty by actively pumping out salts such as potassium and sodium out of the ascending limb of the nephron. It does this by using ATP to actively pump against the concentration gradient. This is done to make the medulla hypertonic in an effort to form an osmotic gradient. Another thing to note is that the ascending limb is not permeable to water. To only pump out salt and water stays in. The descending limb is the one that's permeable to water, which allows the water to escape. Water naturally wants to diffuse out of the descending limb to balance out the abnormal tonicity that was created by the ascending limb. The same principle applies to the collecting duct as well, because it too passes through the salty medulla. This process plays a huge role in water reabsorption, because all the water that leaves the loop of Henle returns to the blood. In summary, this technique is used to make the area around the nephron salty, to push water out of the nephron back into the body. Another aid to reabsorption of water and salt is ADH. ADH is a hormone that is released into the collecting duct by the posterior lobe of the pituitary, as signaled by the hypothalamus in the brain. This hormone plays a huge role in water reabsorption, and when it is released into the kidneys, urine production is hindered because more water is forced into the blood, increasing the blood volume and pressure. If you don't drink enough water, the pituitary releases ADH, which causes more reabsorption of water. But if you drink too much, ADH is not released, and more water is excreted and more urine forms.
More than 99% of the sodium that enters the nephron at the glomerulus is returned back to the blood. 67% of sodium is reabsorbed at the proximal convoluted tubule, and 25% is secreted out of the ascending limb of the nephron. These statistics show how important salt is for our body, considering how hard it tries to get it back. For example, we have many hormones that regulate the reabsorption of sodium, especially the distal convoluted tubule. The hormone aldosterone, which is secreted by the adrenal glands, as signaled by the kidneys themselves, help to maintain blood pressure, water, and salt balance in the body, by helping the kidneys retain sodium and excrete potassium. When aldosterone production falls too low, the kidneys are not able to keep water and salt levels balanced, leading to a drop in both blood volume and pressure. Moving on, the juxtaglomerular apparatus is a specialized region of the nephron between the afferent arteriole and the distal convoluted tubule that secretes renin, a proteolytic enzyme produced by special kidney cells when blood volume and pressure is too low. It is released into the bloodstream in response to reduced salt levels or low blood volume. It controls the activation of the hormone angiotensin, which stimulates the adrenal glands to produce aldosterone. It is important to note that the reabsorption of salt and water are linked, as the reabsorption of sodium ions is often followed by the reabsorption of water. This also explains why blood volume and pressure rise when aldosterone is released, because water is also returning to the blood.
The Kidneys play a huge role in maintaining acid-base balance. In the kidneys, bicarbonate ions are reabsorbed and the hydrogen ions are excreted as needed to maintain pH of the blood. Excess hydrogen ions are buffered. Here is the equation for the acid-base balance. The excretion of carbon dioxide by lungs helps keep pH in normal limits, because when carbon dioxide is exhaled, the reaction is pushed to the right, and hydrogen ions are tied up in water. When blood pH decreases, the carotid bodies and aortic bodies stimulate the respiratory system to increase the breathing rate. When pH rises, the respiratory center causes the increase of bicarbonate ions. In the kidneys, bicarbonate ions are reabsorbed and hydrogen ions are excreted as needed to maintain pH of the blood. Excess hydrogen ions are buffered.
The final product of the excretory system is urine. Urine is secreted from the body through the urethra, but there's far more to it than just a dirty liquid. Urine is the collection of all the wastes that were separated from the blood, specifically metabolic wastes like urea, uric acid, ammonia, and nitrogenous wastes. Thanks to the excretory system, the wastes that were present in the renal artery are entirely removed from the blood by the time it leaves the kidneys by way of the renal vein, yet the majority of the nutrients are still present in the blood. Kidneys play a vital role in our health. If we didn't have a properly functioning excretory system, all those toxins would remain in our blood, and essential nutrients would seep out of our bodies, leading to our inevitable death.